1 million tons of black volcanic rock. We were told they were stacked toward the gods, that the people who built them were reaching toward heaven, toward enlightenment, toward something larger than themselves. But the closer you look, the more the story changes. Because those stones were not temples in the way we understand temples. Every single block, every carved face, every stupa, every hidden corridor was built for the dead, for kings whose bodies had already been burned, whose dynasty's greatest fear was not death itself, but being forgotten after it. This is Java, and for one extraordinary century, roughly between the years 750 and 850 of the Common Era, this island became the site of the most silent, most expensive, most architecturally obsessive competition in human history. 2 ruling houses, 2 religions, 1 island, and the same bed. By the year 928, it was over. The roots came first, threading between the stones, lifting paving slabs, then the vines, then the canopy closed and the light disappeared. By 1700, the people living near the greatest Buddhist monument ever constructed did not know what it was. They called it a hill. In 1814, Raffles dispatched an engineer named H.C. Cornelius into the interior. What Cornelius found required 200 men working for a month and a half, cutting vegetation, burning roots, clearing centuries of debris, before the outline of the structure became visible. Underneath it all, the largest Buddhist sanctuary ever built by human hands. To understand how it got there, we need to go back 1,200 years. To a mountain that was trying to kill the people who climbed it. (2,093 meters above sea level in central Java, there is a plateau that has no business sustaining human life. The air is thin and cold. The ground exhales. Sulfurous craters boil with water the color of old coins, yellow, green, acidic, smelling of something between rotten eggs and the inside of a forge. Thick white gas rolls across the ground in the morning, pooling in the lower areas, occasionally reaching concentrations that are simply, quietly lethal. In 1979, a sudden emission of carbon dioxide here killed 142 people. This is the Dieng Plateau, and it is where, sometime around the year 700, the first great builders of Java chose to construct their earliest temples. They were called the Sanjaya, a Hindu dynasty devoted to Shiva, the god of destruction and renewal, the god whose domain was, specifically, the mountain. In the year 732, a king named Sanjaya raised a stone monument called a linga on a hill called Gunung Wukir, a volcanic peak just 10 kilometers from what would later become Borobudur. The inscription he left on that stone is the oldest known record of a kingdom in central Java. The word Mataram, The name he gave his kingdom means, at its root, mother. The earth that feeds you. The ground beneath the rice field. But the Sanjaya did not build on the fertile lowlands. They built here, on a plateau, where the earth breathed poison. The scholar Veronique de Groot, in her exhaustive study of central Javanese temple placement, found something that should surprise us, but somehow doesn't. The builders of these temples chose their sites with extraordinary deliberateness. Volcanoes, river sources, natural springs, places where the earth was visibly active, alive, dangerous, powerful. This was not recklessness. This was theology. To approach a god, you did not go to a comfortable place. You went to the edge of what was survivable. The volcanic plateau was not despite its danger, it was because of it. The Javanese understood, long before Hinduism arrived from India to give it formal language, that power lived where the earth was unstable, where something was happening beneath the surface that human beings could not control. At their peak, there were perhaps 400 temples on the Dieng Plateau. Today, 8 remain. They stand in clusters: the Arjuna group, the Dvaravati group, the Gatotkacha group, each shrine dedicated to a semi-divine figure from the Mahabharata, the great Hindu epic. Small, precise, carved from volcanic andesite, the color of wet charcoal. If you visit today, and you can, though the gas vents still operate and visitors are sometimes turned back at the entrance, you will find those temples rising through the morning mist as if they are appearing, not standing. The sulfur smell is there. The cold is there. The sense that something underneath is not entirely still. Some things do not change. But the Sanjaya did not hold the plateau, or the island, forever. Around the year 780, a new power arrived in central Java, and they had different ideas about where to build. They called themselves the Sailendra. The name means, in Sanskrit, Lords of the Mountain. It is possible they chose this name deliberately, to claim the same mountainous spiritual authority the Sanjaya had built their identity around. Or it is possible they simply believed it. What we know for certain is this. By around 780, the Sailendra had replaced the Sanjaya as the dominant political force in central Java. And where the Sanjaya had worshipped Shiva, the destroyer, the Sailendra followed Mahayana Buddhism. They believed in a path to enlightenment that did not require isolation or austerity, but instead offered the help of enlightened beings, bodhisattvas, who remained in the world out of compassion to guide others toward salvation. The Sailendra also believed, with considerable conviction, in the power of building large things. At some point around the year 760, construction began on a hill in the Kedu Plain, a fertile, well-watered valley in the shadow of Mount Merapi. The hill was reshaped. Stone was quarried from nearby riverbeds and hauled up its slopes. Thousands of andesite blocks, each weighing roughly 100 kilograms, were carved and fitted without mortar, held in place by their own weight and the precision of the work. The project would take approximately 70 years to complete. Over 1 million stone blocks, all quarried, transported, carved and assembled by hand. And when it was finished, when the king Samaratunga put the final stones in place sometime around 830, what stood on that hill was not simply a temple. It was something the world had never seen before and has not seen since. Borobudur. The scholar John Miksic, who has spent decades studying this monument, describes it as three things simultaneously. A mandala, a map of the Buddhist cosmos, rendered in stone, organized into levels that represent the stages of the mind's journey from desire toward liberation. A stupa, a reliquary monument containing the sacred remains of the Buddha. And a mountain, a recreation of Meru, the cosmic peak at the center of the universe, where the gods descend and the ancestors dwell. You enter Borobudur at the base and you walk clockwise, always to the right, always keeping the main wall close. The first galleries are labyrinthine, narrow corridors, dense relief carvings on every surface, the stories of cause and effect, action and consequence. As you climb, the walls open, the air changes. By the time you reach the upper circular terraces, where 72 perforated stupas each contain a seated Buddha, the galleries are gone entirely. There is only open sky, and the mountain beneath you, and the plain stretching out in every direction. It is designed to be a journey. You arrive in the world of desire, and you walk your way out of it. But here is what Borobudur does not tell you when you first see it. The structure you walk today was not the structure that was planned. The original base, the foundation tier, was covered during construction, buried, hidden beneath a reinforced platform that was added after the builders realized the monument was beginning to shift. And that hidden base contains something that was never meant to be seen. In 1885, a Dutch archaeologist named Brandes was examining a corner of the monument when he noticed something unusual about the stone near the ground. He had a section carefully excavated. Underneath the added foundation, perfectly preserved, 160 relief panels, carved with extraordinary skill, depicting scenes from the Karmawibhanga, the Buddhist text of cause and effect. The scenes are not of heaven. They are not of bodhisattvas or enlightened beings or the peaceful architecture of the upper levels. They are of ordinary human life in all of its most difficult forms. A man stealing, a woman being abused, animals being slaughtered, bodies being tormented in various realms of punishment. The full, unedited catalogue of what happens when human beings act from desire rather than wisdom. Why were they buried? Three theories have competed for a century and a half. The structural argument. The monument began to sink during construction, and covering the base was the only way to stabilize it. The content was incidental. The theological argument. The world of desire was supposed to be hidden. You walk above it, unknowing, which is the point. The aesthetic argument. The builders, or the Dutch administrators who restored the site later, found the content uncomfortable and preferred it out of sight. We do not know which is true. We may never know. What we know is this. Somewhere beneath every step you take at Borobudur, there is a world of murder and theft and punishment, carefully carved and carefully hidden. It has been there for 1,200 years. And if you look today at the one exposed corner, the section that remains permanently uncovered so visitors can see what lies beneath, the carvings are still crisp, still detailed, still watching. There is a moment in the history of Java that no document fully captures. Around the year 832, give or take a decade, as the records allow, a Sailendra princess named Sri Kahulunan, also known as Pramodhawadhani, married a Sanjaya prince named Rakai Pikatan. On its surface, this was a political arrangement. Two dynasties, one Buddhist, one Hindu, had been sharing power in central Java for decades. The marriage formalized that relationship, sealed it. The children born of this union could claim loyalty to either house. That was the point. But what came next tells us something about what was really happening. Pikatan built temples for his wife's religion. He made donations to Buddhist sanctuaries across the region, including the beautiful Plausen complex, which still stands today. Its twin towers rising from a field of smaller shrines like a conversation held in stone. And then he took everything else, every resource, every quarry, every team of craftsmen and laborers he could marshal, and began building something 50 kilometers to the east of Borobudur. He called it Prambanan, or rather, the complex we now call Prambanan. Originally built to honor the Hindu trinity of Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. Its central Shiva temple stands 47 meters high. When it was complete, the complex contained more than 250 individual structures. Borobudur and Prambanan were built within the same lifetime, by people who were, in the most literal sense, family. The historian Roy Jordan, who has spent decades studying Prambanan, argues against the simplest interpretation of this, that it was a religious competition, one side trying to outdo the other. He writes that Buddhists and Hindus in central Java generally lived peacefully together and helped each other in building their respective sanctuaries. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps Pikatan genuinely honored both traditions, and the two monuments rising simultaneously across the Kedu Plain were not a cold war, but a kind of double crown. The island expressing its full spiritual range at once. But the people of Java, over the centuries, remembered it differently. There is a legend told in Java about the founding of Prambanan. It is not a comfortable story, and scholars now believe it may be the closest thing we have to an honest account of what this marriage actually felt like from the inside. A king named Boko had a daughter named Roro Jongrang, the slender virgin, the narrow one. She was beautiful and she was proud. And when a prince named Bandung Bondowoso came to take her by force after defeating her father in battle, she agreed to marry him. But only on two conditions. First, he must build a well. Second, he must build 1,000 temples in a single night. Bandung Bondowoso was not an ordinary man. He called upon spirits, the jinn, the demons, the forces that move beneath the ground. And they came. By midnight, 999 temples stood. Roro Jongrang saw that she was losing. So she woke her servants. She had them light fires in the east and begin pounding rice. The sounds and the light of dawn manufactured before the actual dawn arrived. The spirits, believing the sun was rising, fled. The 1000th temple remained unfinished. When Bandung Bondowoso discovered the trick, he cursed her. He turned her to stone. She stands in the northern chamber of the Shiva temple at Prambanan to this day. The statue of Durga, the goddess of destruction, the fiercest manifestation of divine feminine power. The local people call her Loro Jongrang, the slender virgin, the cursed princess. Historians now believe that the legend is a memory, that King Boko is Samaratunga, the Sailendra king who built Borobudur and whose dynasty Pikatan displaced. That Bandung Bondowoso is Rakai Pikatan himself. That Roro Jongrang is Pramodawardhani, the Sailendra princess who was brought into the Sanjaya house by marriage, who watched her husband build Hindu temples around the Buddhist world her father had created, and who was, in the end, absorbed into a faith that was not her own. She made donations to Buddhist sanctuaries. A single inscription, dated to around 842, records her allocating revenue from a village to support a sanctuary called Pumisambhara, which some scholars believe may be another name for Borobudur. She did not stop trying. But her brother Balaputra did not have her patience. Sometime around 850, Balaputra, Samaratunga's son, Pramodawardhani's brother, the man who believed the Sailendra throne of Java was rightfully his, fought Pikatan directly, and lost. He fled to Sumatra, where his mother's family had connections to the powerful kingdom of Srivijaya. He eventually became its ruler. A Nalanda charter from around 860, a grant from an Indian monastery thousands of miles away, names him as the grandson of a great Sailendra king of Java, now ruling in Sumatra. He had built a monastery at Nalanda in India, the greatest Buddhist university of the ancient world. He wanted people to remember who he was and where he came from. After his defeat, after 850, no more great Buddhist monuments were built in central Java. The historian George Codes writes it plainly. Without the support of the Sailendra, no more great Buddhist monuments were built on the island. The Sanjaya had won. Java was Hindu again, but not for long. In all of this, the dynasties, the marriages, the theological competition rendered in millions of carved stones, there is something missing from the record. The people who did the work. Jan Wisseman Christie, in her analysis of early Javanese demography, describes what she calls states without cities, extraordinary monuments, almost no urban settlement, no evidence of concentrated labor camps, no records of organized slave populations, no great warehouses or administrative centers. Instead, villages. Hundreds of small agricultural villages distributed across the river valleys of central Java, each contributing labor according to its obligations to the king, each sending teams of men to the construction sites during the agricultural off-season. The stones they carried weighed 100 kilograms each. The river was kilometers away. The hill was steep. Miksik notes that the situation was comparable to that found in Bali today, where almost every farmer is also a part-time artisan. It is possible, perhaps likely, that many of the workers understood themselves to be earning spiritual merit, that the act of building a stupa, of helping to carve a Buddha face into volcanic stone, was itself a form of religious practice. Possible, but not certain. What is certain is what Clifford Geertz found when he studied the religious life of ordinary Javanese people in the 20th century. The layer of belief that survived long after Hinduism, long after Buddhism, long after Islam. He called it the Abangan tradition, the animist root that never died. Beneath the Sanskrit, beneath the temple rituals, beneath whatever official religion the court was practicing at any given moment, the Javanese understood the world to be inhabited, filled with spirits, Memedis, the frightening ones, who lurk at road crossings and abandoned places, Lelembuts, the possessing ones, who enter the body without warning, Danjangs, the guardian spirits attached to specific trees, specific stones, specific hills. The mountains were not metaphors. They were inhabited. The volcanoes were not symbols of divine power. They were the actual residences of forces that could help you or destroy you, depending entirely on whether you had maintained the proper relationship with them. The scholar W. F. Stuterheim, examining the records of early Javanese kingship, found that the kings who declared themselves to be living manifestations of Shiva or the Buddha were not importing a foreign idea. They were translating a local one, the belief that certain human beings could become vessels for the powers that lived in the volcanic peaks. That was already there, centuries before the first Sanskrit inscription. Hinduism and Buddhism gave it new words. They did not replace what was underneath. And the people who carried those stones up that hill decade after decade, they were doing it in a world where the mountain above them was watching. Where the ash that occasionally drifted down from Merapi's summit was not geological noise, but communication. They believed, in ways we can only partially reconstruct, that the king's insatiable appetite for stone and labor and monument was disturbing something that should not be disturbed. That the mountain had limits. That there would eventually be an answer. In the year 907, a stone inscription was carved in central Java recording the extent of the Mataram kingdom's authority. It is one of the most complete administrative records of the period. After 907, the inscriptions thin. The records become less frequent, less detailed, covering smaller areas. After 928, nothing. The silence is not gradual. It is not the slow fading of a civilization running out of resources or losing confidence. The inscriptions simply stop. The stone carvers put down their tools. The court ceased to function in central Java, and the seat of government, the capital, the administrative center, the palace, moved east, to the valley of the Brantas River in East Java. A king named Empu Sindok made the crossing sometime around 928 to 930. He founded a new kingdom on the other side. He called it Medang, and central Java was left behind. Why? This is one of the great unanswered questions of Southeast Asian history. The later Javanese sources speak only of a calamity, a great event, something that made continuation impossible. In 1966, a farmer in a village called Sambisari was digging in his field when his shovel hit stone. Archaeologists were called. What they found, buried under 6 meters of volcanic material, sand, tough boulders, was a complete 9th century Hindu temple, perfectly preserved. The deposits covering it were identified as Lahar, the dense, fast-moving flows of volcanic debris and water that cascade down Merapi's slopes after an eruption. The same story repeated nearby. Kadisoka, Kedulan, Pustakasala. Temple after temple, buried under layers of Merapi's output, each layer representing a different eruption at a different time. The Dutch geologist R.W. van Bemmelen, writing in 1949, argued that Merapi had experienced a catastrophic eruption around the year 1006. One so large that part of the volcano's summit collapsed to the southwest, damming the Progo River and creating a vast lake in the Kedu Plain. The lake, he suggested, eventually covered Borobudur itself. But other researchers have pushed back. They find no definitive evidence of a single catastrophic eruption precisely in 928 or 929. What they find instead is evidence of sustained, repeated volcanic activity over many decades: ash falls, lahar flows, pyroclastic events, each one damaging crops, disrupting irrigation, shifting river courses, making the fertile plain incrementally less hospitable. And perhaps that is the real answer. Not a single disaster, but a slow accumulation of disasters. Merapi, which had been active throughout the entire period of monumental construction, which had provided the volcanic andesite that the builders quarried, which had fertilized the soil that fed the workers, now turned against the civilization it had partly made. There may have been political pressure too. Srivijaya, the Sumatran power that Balaputra had fled to and eventually ruled, had reason to destabilize a Java that had humiliated the Sailendra. The later records speak of attacks from a kingdom called Wura Wari, possibly a Srivijayan proxy. But the people of Java, in their own tradition, remembered it differently. They remembered that the kings had disturbed the mountain, that the incessant building, the quarrying of volcanic stone, the endless labor, the rivers of resources flowing into monuments instead of into fields and families, had angered the spirits of the peaks, that the Maha Pralaya, the great dissolution, was not random. It was an answer. And then the jungle came. It took roughly a century for the forest to fully reclaim what the civilization had built. The trees grew between the stones. The vines followed the carvings. The galleries filled with sediment. The ash fell year after year, and the monuments sank into the earth that had always been waiting to receive them. And the irony, the one that Miksik notes with something close to wonder, is that this is why they survived. The soil that buried them protected them. The ash that covered the reliefs preserved the detail of the carving. The darkness that hid them from the sun slowed the biological processes that would have dissolved the stone. What the mountain gave, the mountain took back. And in taking it back, it kept it safe. In the 1850s, just 4 decades after Cornelius's workers had cleared the jungle from Borobudur, the Javanese began returning. They came without knowing what it was, without any memory of its original name, its original purpose, the dynasty that built it. They brought incense. They brought flowers. They laid offerings at the feet of statues whose names they could no longer read. They understood, without being told, that this was a place where something mattered. The historian John Miksich, who has spent his career trying to understand what Borobudur was and is, finds this almost unbearably moving. The meaning was gone. The context was gone. 9 centuries of silence had erased the theological framework, the dynastic history, the entire world that had made the monument possible. And still, the people came, and they knew to bring offerings. In the northern chamber of the Shiva temple at Prambanan, there is a statue of the goddess Durga. She stands in the posture of a warrior, 10 arms, each holding a weapon or a sacred object, her left foot resting on the neck of the buffalo demon she has just defeated. Her face is calm, in the way that only faces made of stone can be calm, without effort, without pretense, simply still. The local people call her Loro Jongrang, the cursed princess, the girl who tried to stop history and became part of it instead. The complex around her still stands in the late afternoon shadow of Merapi, which has erupted as recently as 2010 and will erupt again. Those who enter the northern chamber and stop before her find something difficult to name in her expression. Not sadness, not defiance, simply presence. Some people reach out, not quite touching. Something about the face. At Prambanan, every year, the Ramayana ballet is performed under the open sky with the illuminated temple as backdrop. The story of Rama and Sita, of exile and loyalty and the defeat of the demon king, is 1,500 years old on this island. The audience knows every scene, goes quiet at exactly the right moments. The story hasn't needed to be explained for a very long time. At Borobudur, people still climb the monument in the dark before dawn, the same clockwise circuit that pilgrims walked 1,200 years ago, until they reach the upper terraces just as the sky begins to lighten over Merapi. There is a tradition, not Buddhist but very old, that reaching through the perforated stonework of one of the upper stupas to touch the Buddha's hand will bring good fortune. The stone around those openings has been worn smooth by 1,000 years of reaching hands. And at Dieng, 2,000 meters above the rice fields, where the gas still vents and the sulfur still stains the rocks yellow, the small temples still stand in their morning fog. Restored now, accessible, described in guidebooks as the oldest stone structures in Java, which they are. But that description misses something. The oldest stone structures in Java were built on a volcanic plateau that was actively trying to kill the builders. Not despite that. Because of it. The power was in the danger. The gods were in the poison. Here is what happened between 928 and 1814. The jungle grew, the ash fell, the stones sank. The civilization that had built the largest Buddhist monument on earth, that had raised a Hindu temple complex of 250 individual structures, that had carved 1 million blocks of volcanic stone into an image of the universe. That civilization relocated to the east, left its monuments behind, converted eventually to Islam, and over the course of several centuries stopped thinking about what it had left. For nearly 900 years, Borobudur was present but invisible, not destroyed, not looted, not significantly, just covered, just forgotten in the specific way that places are forgotten when the people who remember them are gone. When Cornelius's workers began clearing the monument in 1814, they were not uncovering a ruin. They were uncovering something that had been waiting. The reliefs were intact. The statues were in place. The galleries were exactly as they had been, filled with sediment but structurally sound. The mountain had protected what the mountain had made. Because Borobudur was built from volcanic andesite, stone formed by the same geological process that periodically covers it in ash. The material and the threat are the same material. The monument was carved from Merapi's ancient output, and it was preserved by Merapi's more recent output, and it will eventually be damaged by Merapi's future output. This is not metaphor. This is geology. But I think the Javanese who laid offerings at Borobudur's feet in the 1850s, who came without knowing what it was, who brought flowers and incense to statues whose names they had forgotten, I think they understood something that the historians did not. They understood that the place remembered even when the people did not. That the stones kept something in them, not supernatural, not magical, just the weight of what was built here, the weight of what was built here and why. Samaratunga built Borobudur for the dead, for himself and the dynasty he represented, to hold their spirits at the center of the universe after the bodies were gone. Pikatan built Prambanan for the same reason, in a different theological language. 2 kings, 2 religions, 1 island, 1 century, and between them, one of the most concentrated bursts of architectural ambition in the history of the human species. They wanted to last forever. And in a way that neither of them intended, they did. Not because stone is permanent, it isn't. Prambanan was shattered by earthquakes in 1006 and again in 2006. Borobudur has been sinking slowly since the day it was built. The reliefs are wearing. The volcanic stone is porous and absorbs water and eventually, inevitably, dissolves. They lasted because they were buried, because the mountain covered them at exactly the right moment before the damage was too great, because 9 centuries of darkness kept them safe. The people who built these monuments wanted to outsmart death, to place themselves at the center of the cosmos and remain there, to win the competition they'd been running, against each other, against time, against the mountain that watched everything from the east. They lost that competition. Every single one of them. Samaratunga, Pikatan, Pramodawadani, the cursed princess still standing in her northern chamber. Balaputra, who fled to Sumatra and sent money to a monastery in India so that someone, somewhere, would remember his name. But the stones won. The stones are still there.